Welcome to Dante's Inferno. Today we're going to be introducing the Inferno and getting you ready. Next week, instead of having a follow-up, since the structure and narrative of Dante isn't really a full kind of story, it's a lot of different little stories put together, watch one of your peers' videos and comment on one of those, okay? You can comment on as many as you want, or as few as you want, all right? But it'll help you have a better understanding of the different cantos that we are reading. But for now, let's get into a discussion of Dante. So Dante's Inferno is the first cantica of 3 cantiques, which is just a fancy way of saying in Italian a poem that's a hymn-like or religious in nature. Okay? The Divine Comedy, which includes all 3 parts, which would be Paradise, Purgatory, and Hell. Not in that order, though. They go Hell, Purgatory, and then Paradise. Was written between 1308 and 1321. The poem starts with a fictionalized Dante as he descends into Hell, or Inferno, with the help of the Italian poet Virgil. The most famous... Virgil's most famous for the epic poem The Aeneid, which depicts the forming of Rome by Aeneas after the Trojan War. He escapes the Trojan War, which is what the Iliad is about, right? And heads off into the Mediterranean, ends up in Italy, and forms Rome. And Virgil wrote about that. Historically, Dante's Commedia, which is what it's more commonly known as, has become considered the definitive Italian work, surpassing that of Virgil, and one of the most influential works in Western literature. You see reference to it all over the place, in other pieces of literature, in art, in movies, in stuff that is high art, low art, music, all sorts of stuff. The Commedia in whole, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, is 14,233 lines, with each cantica consisting of 33 cantos, so 33 sections. The poem is allegorical in nature, in which the narrative is representative of a moral, in this case biblical, and significant. Both themes and structure plays in the role of how Dante presents his allegory. For instance, the 33 cantos for each poem represents the 33 years of Christ, and he also plays with a lot of other biblical numerologies. The number 3 and the groupings of 3, such as the 9 circles of hell, are prominent throughout the poem. In addition to this, the way that Dante wrote the poem works in this numerology. For instance, Dante uses a trezza rima scheme for his verse, which has 11 syllables per line and follows a specific pattern. It's called a trecet pattern. So basically that means that each stanza has 3 lines, with each line being 11 syllables. So each stanza also has 33 syllables. And then the pattern that it follows is kind of confusing to hear, so you might want to write this down. But it goes A, B, A, B, C, B, C, D, C, D, E, D, etc. So each stanza has 33 syllables per stanza, with 33 stanzas per cantos. In other words, it's a continual homage to Christ's life. The numerology of Commedia doesn't stop there, within the structures of 3 repeating in themes, descriptions, places, and other various categories. While you're reading, look and see if you can catch some different 3s, descriptions of 3 things, or repetition of 3s, etc. Outside of the allegorical numerology within the poem, Dante also wrote outside of the typical Latin. Most scholarly and literary texts of the time were written in Latin, but Dante decided instead to write in a Florentine dialect, a standard basic Italian that he would have spoken and his peers would have spoken in everyday life. This choice, which was seen as a political push against scholarship and against the church by bringing the poem to the people, it's credited with establishing what we see as modern day standardized Italian, and would set a precedent for future Italian texts, both within and outside the church. In other words, Dante was furious with the church. He didn't like how things were run. He thought it was corrupt, and that we needed to bring Christ and the church back to the people. And so instead of writing in Latin, which only scholars or people of the church would know, he moved it into a dialect that everybody could speak, and many people could read, to give it back to the people. While little is known about Dante's personal life outside of a few very key moments that he relates through his fictionalized portrayal of himself, we do know that he was intricately involved in Florentine politics. From the Inferno, we know that he was midway upon the journey of our life. This is from Cantos 1, line 1, which suggests that he was probably 35 or so when the text begins in 1300. But I often like to think that he sees himself as being 33, the same age as the death of Christ, to kind of add to that numerology even more. Furthermore, in Paradiso, Dante describes himself as, quote, revolved within the eternal twins I saw revealed from the hills to the river outlets, the threshing floor that makes us so ferocious. This is from Cantos 22, lines 151 through 154, which suggests that he was born under the Gemini sign, right? The eternal twins. So it's believed that he was probably born in May or early June of 1265 to 1267, someplace in there. During this period of his life, when he was at that age, northern Italy was split between those who supported the papacy, the Guelphs, and those who supported the Holy Roman Empire, which would eventually turn into the Italian emperor. By birth, he was a Guelph, and they were in the minority, and they didn't hold any power. This power conflict would become a central theme in his life, and although the Guelphs would eventually take over Florence, Dante was on the wrong side of the split when they took over, and he was eventually forced into exile in 1302, and he would write the majority of his 3 great poems in exile. His wife, Gemma, would remain in Italy, while Dante, 3 of his sons, and 1 of his daughters would follow him into exile. They pretty much never spoke again, as far as we know, or never saw each other again, though they did exchange some letters. In 1326, at the assumed age of 56, Dante died in Ravenna, Italy, and he was entombed there. Florence eventually regretted his exile after the Comita's publication in full and after it became so popular, and they built a tomb for him in 1829, but Ravenna would never give up his remains, and so his body remains outside of his beloved Florence. But you can still go and see the monument that they made for him if you ever get there. The first canto of the Inferno is an introduction to the poem at large. And so technically there's 34 cantos, but the first canto acts as a prologue, so they don't count that one. And it builds the setting for us. It's Dante's descent into the Inferno. It begins on the eve of Good Friday. We find that Dante is lost in a dark wood. We can take that for whatever allegory we want. He's confronted by ferocious beasts, a lion, a leopard, and a she-wolf. He's unable to find salvation from the straight way forward. And during his wanderings, he's finally rescued by Virgil, who agrees to help him on his journey through hell in an attempt to find the righteous path forward and to be able to ascend into heaven. Allegorically, Inferno represents the importance of the Catholic soul seeing sin for what it is and to be able to prevent the earthly body from falling into the pits of the three types of sin. And Dante sees the three types of sin as self-indulgency, violence, and malice. And we'll see that divided up, the 9 circles divided up between those, but not evenly divided. The gates of hell rise up for Virgil in Cantos 3 with an explanation, and I'm not going to try the Italian because my Italian is not good. But essentially, it's the most famous line in the entire poem. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. You might have heard that before. But it is the most famous line of all 3 poems. The threshold that greets them, it's filled with an apathetic or cowardly neutral, those who are neither good enough to go to heaven nor evil enough for hell. This concept is purely Dante. It did not exist in the Catholic Church at this time or ever, although it has become a common practice or common belief because of Dante's poem and descriptions. The opening moments, we see a mixture between Catholic principles and ancient texts. For instance, Dante and Virgil arrive on the Agrion River, where souls wait for Carrion to ferry them to hell. Carrion and Agrion are distinctly non-Christian constructs that Dante uses within the allegory to demonstrate the relative newness of Christian mythologies and how much Christian mythologies have taken from past mythologies, specifically Greek and Roman. And then we get into those 3 sections of the 9 circles of hell. So circles 2 through 6, which is comprised of cantos 5 through 10, focuses on the unbaptized and pagans, the lust, gluttony, avarice, and prodigal, the wrath and sullenness and heresy. These circles align heavily with the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. And so you see those happening there. Most of the characters that you meet in these circles are not going to be, as far as Dante is concerned, Christian souls. And if they are, then they did Christianity wrong somehow. Circle 7, which is going to be cantos 12 through 17, is composed of the 3 rings that depict the various levels of violence: those against others, against self, and against God. These rings present the sins of murder, suicide, blasphemy, sodomy, and usury, or the lending of money. Then we move on to circle 8, which is cantos 18 through 30. This has 10 rotten pockets. You can kind of think of rotten pockets as, if you have the circles, these pockets are like sticking off, kind of like spokes off of a wheel almost, except for they don't interconnect to an inner circle. And these inner pockets, these rotten pockets, are filled with people who committed fraud, political corruption, problematic fraud, which is slightly different than fraud. It's more like you intentionally did it, and decisiveness. Within these divisions, Dante observes pimps and seducers, flatterers, simonists, those who trade or purchase religious artifacts or sacred things to make money off of them and not to worship through them, soothsayers or sorcerers, corrupt officials, hypocrites, thieves, the intellectually dishonest. I always liked that plagiarists have their own little spot in hell, according to Dante. Rabble-rousers, which are political agitators, those who would go out and try to convince you of a political view without good intentions, and counterfeiters. So basically people who do a lot of lying or corruption. The final circle in hell, the 9th circle, is going to be depicted in cantos 32 through 34, and it's for the most treacherous of sins. Those sins are that create deceit against those who have caused trust. So people that you should trust but are deceitful. So like bad politicians or church officials who go against the church and whatnot. Those types of things. Traitors to the family, the nation, guests, and benefactors. So basically people who do not act in the way that they should but present themselves as very holy and then turn around. This cantica hits the climax of the presentation with Satan. So at the very end, we finally, in the very depths of hell, this ninth circle, get Satan, which Dante scholar Robin Kirkpatrick explains, quote, proves in effect to be somewhat anticlimactic, as he, Satan, after all, is capable only of two endlessly repetitive actions. His bat-like wings flapping perpetually to refrigerate the frozen depths of hell, and his three mouths endlessly gnawing away at three sinners who are located between his jaws. You can find that in our introduction, that quote. Once again, Dante's playing with the numerologies of three in his depiction of Satan, but instead of the depictive being that which Milton would later write in Paradise Lost in 1667 in England, we find this monstrous fallen angel with three heads who is, quote, nothing but a cold, mechanical, and ultimately absurd bulk over whom Dante scrabbles on his way out of hell, as if the traveler were a child negotiating some theme park boogeyman, end quote. That's also from Kirkpatrick. What begs the ultimate question here in the Infernos that seems to answer is evil self-existent, or does it only exist as a silhouette of goodness? So in other words, is evil always there? There's no way around it. Or do we only see evil because we can see goodness, right? That it's a two-sided coin, essentially. Or is it its own entity? And for Dante, it seems that if evil possesses any power at all, it is at most the power of a vortex, or as he demonstrates through the representations of sin, it is the way in which human beings with varying degrees of consciousness abandon themselves to an emptiness of the soul. And for Dante, that is the absolute worst thing that we can do, is to abandon the soul. So there's a little bit of a very quick introduction of Dante's Inferno and kind of what to expect when you're reading it. Go ahead, and I highly suggest checking out your peers' videos on the different cantos to kind of help you understand who these characters are and the significant history that connects to them as Virgil leads Dante through hell. It makes it a lot easier if you have an understanding of who these characters are and not just some lady that he's talking to who seems to have something wrong. But happy reading, and I look forward to chatting with you in Hypothesis.